Creator, God, source, may your words be in those which I speak, and may they be heard in the heart and spirit of those who this moment hear. In the middle of a really happening time, right between busy and busiest, Jesus said to the disciples, "Let's go away to a deserted place for a while." You just heard what the disciples had been about. You just heard that even in this time now, the people from all of those towns were following the disciples and gathering around the shore. And you can bet, too, that it was a busy time for Jesus. In fact, if there had been a clock chiming across the Sea of Galilee this day, it would have chimed 13 times already. My guess is you've had some of those 13 clock chiming days, I'm sure. That's what it had been this day for Jesus and his disciples. In fact, those chimes kept ringing the whole 6th chapter of Mark's gospel. Gospel means God's good news for our bad situations. And Mark was in a big rush to get out the good news. Mark tells us there's trouble all around, troubles and injustices. The big wigs of religion of that day weren't living like God's people, and Mark is pointing it out to them. There was inequality all around in religion and government, the economy, the legal system, and a world of racial and ethnic injustice. The haves wanted to keep having, and the don't have were struggling with what was left, and that wasn't very much. Mark's gospel comes as a breathless ride. He can't tell us fast enough. What God brought through Jesus can't happen fast enough for Mark. One event follows the other in urgency. In fact, Mark uses the word ethos, which means immediately or at once, more than 40 times in his short gospel. If Mark were to sum up what he wanted everybody to know in one sentence with his message, it would be this: God is here and on our side. My guess is you average one human being per person, just like me. And you have something right now about which you're worrying, something in your life or in the lives of those about whom you care. The ins and outs and comings and goings of our life need Mark's reminder of Christ's living presence that says to us, God is here and on our side. In fact, on July 9th, I was typing this very line, God is here and on our side, on page 2 of the first draft of this sermon that I was preparing for you when I glanced down because my cell phone was vibrating beside me. It was a text from a great longtime friend of ours living in Chicago. It said, "Call me as soon as you get this." Now, she's not a call me as soon as you get this kind of gal, unless it's something for which you'd stop everything to be there. So I did just that. I learned that her daughter, age 30, with years of addiction and recovery, had overdosed and not made it this time. I glanced at the computer and there were Mark's words. I thought I'd been writing them for you. God is here and on our side. I took a big, deep breath and I left you right there on page 2 of the sermon, and I listened to a broken heart on the other end of my call. I said almost nothing. She talked and finally said, "I feel better already just talking to you." And I had said virtually nothing. Those of you who know me, I seldom say nothing. That day, though, my nothing gave my friend space to hear the echo of God in her own heart, her faith, and in her spirit. Somehow, she heard God's news for her tragically bad situation and for her 9-year-old grandson she'd been raising. What she heard from deep within herself was God is here and on our side. You likely have some kind of worry now, worry for you or someone about whom you care. Hold that thought. I'm not going to ask you to write your worry in the chat. Instead, as you hold your concern in your heart and mind, write in chat or in Facebook Live, or maybe just in your mind, the line from the Gospeler Mark, the one he wants you to hear that really says everything that his gospel says. Write his words. God is here and on my side. God is here and on my side. Whether you really believe it or not right now doesn't matter, because God on your side believes in you. God is here and on my side. And then if you've done that, either actually written it or have it now written somewhere in your mind, write the word Amen. Amen is a great word. Amen means, on this foundation, I take my step. Astrid, if you have not put the slide up, please do it now. God is here and on my side. It doesn't say, I'll run myself a marathon on this fountain. The word amen that just appeared there is one of my favorite all-time words. And usually we just say it because it ends the prayer and takes us on to something else. But the word amen means, on this foundation, I take my next step. On this truth, on this place, I take my next step. On what I just said, God is here and on my side, I take my next step. I often wish what it said was, on this marathon of life I'm about to run, but it doesn't say that. God gives us confidence, purpose, place, assurance, and God's strength for our next step, wherever that's taking us. On this truth, I take my next step. Amen. Now, let's take a deep breath. Let's try not to add to those urgency chimes that ring across the Sea of Galilee back in that Mark Jesus day, but let's jump right back into Mark chapter 6. Let's let our own stories, with their concerning thoughts, rest in our heart. They are held there by God's Spirit. So you and I are in good hands. We just got a picture of what's going on a little bit in us. Now let's get back to the picture of what's going on with Jesus and with his disciples on that clock chiming day. At the beginning of chapter 6, Jesus got rejected by the people in his hometown. He probably knew that could happen, but it would still be a bummer. And right after that, Jesus heard his cousin, John the Baptist, his best friend, his co-worker, God-wise, had been killed, actually beheaded. And the head was a birthday present for King Herod, no less. John the Baptist had been pointing out to the people who had power that they'd better shape up their lives. We see what that got him. Now, this didn't stop Jesus, but it certainly slowed down his spirit on that Mark 6 day as well. So that's where Jesus is in the story right now. Then there's the disciples. Jesus had sent the disciples out to the towns around the Sea of Galilee. Now they had come back. They'd come back and they couldn't talk fast enough to tell Jesus all that happened, to tell each other what had happened in the towns into which they visited. They had their success and they had their not so much time. Sure, some folks listened. They listened about Jesus and were glad to hear about God who believed in them and who knew that they counted, a God who loved them. But they had found trouble in those marketplaces too. They told Jesus, those marketplaces are not just for the overworked and underappreciated. They're not just for the disrespected people that we were there to talk to. They like to hear those words about a God who is on their sides, but it was not a place for just buying and selling where people gathered. Marketplaces were the power people places. They were the places where those power people actually wielded their power. The marketplaces were the legal and political centers of their day. And they really showed up, the disciples said to Jesus. It's where power people put their power into action. And they didn't like at all what we had to say. And frankly, Jesus, I'm pretty sure there's trouble ahead for all of us. So, what is Jesus to do? With his own exhausted spirit and with his overworked and out of breath disciples, and with his current day disciples who, as we have already registered in our thoughts some of our concerns for this day, Jesus said to them, to himself and to us, give it a rest. Give it a rest. And come away with me to a deserted place. Get in the boat. We'll row for a while. We'll row together. Let's have some do nothing time. Let's have some remember who we are time. Let's have some reset time. This is the same Jesus who rose with us too. This is Jesus who cannot control our lives and the things happening around us, but who can always infuse our lives with himself. St. Augustine says, when you feel this way, what you need is to become what you are. He seems to point out, without really saying it, that we spend a lot of time working to become what we aren't. So he says to us, become what you are. Like Jesus' reset day in the boat with the disciples. One of my favorite theologians, Frederick Buechner, put it this way: Christ sees us with terrible clarity and sees us whole. Christ sees us with terrible clarity and sees us whole. Our own marketplaces of life have certainly been impacted by COVID's 2020-2021 siege. But we've had a whole lot else in these many, many months that have impacted us too. Like the marketplaces of Jesus' day, our marketplaces impact all parts of life and every level of society. The business of our life, like theirs, is more than buying and selling. Today's life lives out the same twists and turns as Mark's gospel. The same twists and turns as theirs: economics and healthcare, politics, inequality, crime, religion, education, mental health. The list goes on and on. You can find a first century version of every one of those in these Gospels. That's why the scriptures are of value to us, because of God's truth we find there, and because the principles that we're taught, are timeless. Into it all, Good Samaritan rows its boat with creative shifts in its reach of service, care, and encouragement. Good Samaritan, through the COVID months, before, since, and will always be there helping us and helping others. One's close up and one's way beyond. The Reach of Good Samaritan Episcopal in Brandenburg says, you are not alone. God is here and on your side. And we're here to help you remember it. And as we help you remember it, we remember it too. One of the things Good Samaritan did during COVID was have an 8-week after church series on how the Episcopal Church views the Bible, how the Gospels tell Jesus' teaching and call, and how the living spirit of the resurrected Christ is alive and well, empowering us today. The 8 weeks all came down to 4 freedoms. Astrid, will you put that slide up now? The 8 weeks all came down to 4 freedoms. Freedom from condemnation, freedom from fear, freedom to hope, and freedom to love. We think you hear most in person and in print and online when it comes to Good Samaritan. We think you and everybody else who maybe just gets to glance at us once, we think that what you hear every time, what you read every time are those words. We are followers of Christ, called to love, serve, and include all people, no exceptions. Why is it there? Why is it there every time, all the time, everywhere? The reason is because it is the call of Christ, and there are bazillions of places in the world that need to hear it. There's a myriad of voices which do not believe those freedoms for all people, those freedoms, those free spirit loving gifts of God, who don't know and need someone to show them, you know, that they are free from condemnation, free from fear, free to hope, and free to love. So here we are, not necessarily a place, but a stance. Here we are, a walking, talking, serving, including, loving, and rowing stance, called to live as Christ in the world's specifics, representing Christ, that the world might be free of condemnation, free of fear, free of hope, and free of love. I invite you now to put in chat or a comment in Facebook Live, which of these 4 freedoms you are most ready to claim, to reclaim right now. Which you are ready to claim or reclaim right now. Yes, you can pick 2. Yes, you can pick 3. And don't we really want all 4 for ourselves, for everybody we know, and for all the people of the world? Now to these, you say, we say, amen. This is the foundation for your next step. This is the foundation for your next step. And that's the good news. The other news is we're on your side, offering that prayer that you might claim that right now, because we know you're on our side, hoping we too, knowing we too, through God, have all of that within us. That is God's truth, the truth into which you are created and born. The truth into which you are created and born is that you are the perfect, whole, holy child of God. Jesus lives that announcement with every person, then and now. And this, Jesus said, is your come as you are party, because you came pre-approved into this world. So let's live in that come as you are party. Let's live it. After all, we're all rowing together. Amen.